Well, hello and welcome to your weekly dose of higher consciousness. I'm your happy host and trumpeter of truth, Liz Gracia. I host our podcast, trumpeteroftruthradio.com, and our YouTube channel, trumpeteroftruhtv.com. And today, we're moving forward with our intention to help you clear negative emotions, stop with the struggle, learn how to let go, and have a happy, loving life where you can be happy every day of your life and love yourself. More importantly, how to love yourself. So every week we have different topics that we're going to cover. Most of them are based on the map of consciousness and understanding where true power exists in your life and how you can be powerful and have some type of relative control over what's going on when you understand how to let go of the lower levels emotions. So once a month, I want to hit on a major level on the map of consciousness. And today, we're going to talk about courage, the level of courage. And I want to talk about courage is because it's the doorway into the beginning of having true power in life. And in order to break free of the struggle and lower levels of emotion that keep you stuck, you got to step into courage. But before we get going on talking about courage, where everyone needs to go, if you're having trouble in your life, you got to step into courage on it. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I promised at the beginning of every podcast and video cast, I have your weekly dose of higher consciousness quiz. And today's quiz, I always have 3 things that I want you to consider. Which of the 3 is of the highest consciousness? And today, we're looking at random acts of kindness. That way of being has a calibrated level of consciousness. We're also looking at visualization healing. You know, the process of visualizing yourself healing has a positive level of consciousness, and we're going to talk about that. And the last one, let me see what it is. I thought I could remember them all. is, kneeling to pray. So, kneeling to pray is a devotional act, and it has a calibrated level of consciousness as well. So, we're going to have the answer to those at the end of this podcast and video cast. So another thing that I like to address each week, because my little tagline is how to be happy and love yourself. And Dr. Hawkins, and all of my teachings are based on Dr. David R. Hawkins' books. And today we're going to take a look at Letting Go, The Pathway to Surrender. This is one of the books we're going to take a look at. And I'm also referring to his book of slides because he's got some great info in here. But every week, I want to touch on one of his 101 Ways to Happiness. And we're on number 7 this week on the 101 Ways to Happiness. And this week's one is Joie de vivre is independent of events. So if you have what's called joie de vivre, it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. You're going to be happy. And let me just read this little passage because it's hard to describe joie de vivre. But it's a certain attitude, a style of happiness in which if you lost all your money today and someone asks, why are you happy? You respond, I'm happy because I lost all my money today. So it doesn't matter the circumstances going on in your life because you're operating from a level of consciousness and understanding that you're happy and this is a temporary condition. It could change tomorrow. And when you're operating from a level of happiness, the circumstances will change fairly quickly because you're operating from a very powerful knowingness. So, joie de vivre is the realization that happiness is a superior style. I love that, a superior style. And it's part of a decision to have a certain attitude towards life and existential position of being happy and grateful and enjoying in whatever expression your life is expressing right now. I'm going to repeat that one because I like it. So, joie de vivre is the realization that happiness is a superior style. Joie de vivre is part of a decision to have a certain attitude towards life, an existential position of being happy and grateful and in enjoying in whatever expression your life is expressing right now. This is like the power of now talking to us as well. Being present with whatever is, and it's kind of like the Rumi poem, The Guest House. And when you're operating from a higher level of consciousness, you understand that you don't know the greater context of your life. All that is, everything that exists that brought you to this moment. And the guest house, the Rumi poem of The Guest House, is accepting whoever shows up and being grateful and understanding that there's a silver lining to anything. And when you have the position of being happy, something terrible could show up, but you pass through it quickly because of that attitude and the power present in happiness and being grateful. So just so you know, that's our 101 happiness tips from Dr. Hawkins' book of slides. Number 7, I think it was. I'll keep track of these so I don't repeat myself, but some are worth repeating. So today we're going to talk about courage. And courage on the map is 200 on the map of consciousness, calibrates at 200 on the map, which is 10 to the 200th power. And if this is new to you, this is your first episode of listening in on your weekly dose of higher consciousness, I highly recommend you go back to the first 7 foundational basics where I lay the groundwork for understanding Dr. Hawkins' teaching and talking about higher levels of the map of consciousness. And we're talking about the higher levels today, so you'd want to go take a peek at higher levels of consciousness. But you need to know the lower ones too, so both of them would be helpful to your understanding. So courage is 200 on the map, and it's the doorway to true power. And when you step into courage, and I'm going to read out of Dr. Hawkins' Letting Go book. He talks about stepping into courage. And the hallmark of courage is the knowledge and feeling of I can. It's a can-do attitude, okay? And it's a positive state in which we feel assured, skillful, adept, competent, capable, alive, loving, and giving with an overall zest for life. We're capable of humor, activity, confidence, and clarity. And in this state, we feel centered, balanced, flexible, happy, independent, and self-sufficient. Now, I had an issue in my life where I stepped into courage on it. And on that day, I felt it. I felt the shift. And I came to this book and I read the passage on courage. And everything I felt was practically verbatim, which I just read to you from the book. So it was kind of interesting. I think it's safe to say that when you're entering into another level, it's described verbatim, you know, what you're feeling, unless you're mixing the levels. But, you know, you can fly it. Like I felt verbatim stepping into courage on whatever the issue was I was working on. So last week I did how to let go, and I spoke about the mechanism of letting go and how to do it, how to break free from the struggle of lower level consciousness. So according to Dr. Hawkins and my own experience, the level of courage is very helpful in the mechanism of surrender because you're stepping into power. You have power now, significantly more power than you had in the lower levels. So just in courage, we know that you can look at your feelings and you don't have to be afraid of your feelings anymore. This is kind of the attitude. It's like, you know what? I can look at these feelings. They aren't going to kill me. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be there because I'm willing to look at them. And that shift alone in consciousness is raising your level of consciousness. You're entering into a higher state where handling those becomes much easier. So, and you can handle them and you can take responsibility for them, and you're willing to take risks to let go of old points of view and explore new ones. So in this state, you're willing to be joyous and share your experience with others, and you experience yourself as willing and able. So I highly recommend, if you're struggling with anything that are on the lower levels, and again, you might want to go look at the lower levels of consciousness. It's not a mystery. what they are, but it may be unfamiliar to you as to the map, because it's helpful to know where you're at in the lower levels and understand that you can't necessarily make the leap to courage if you're hanging out low in fear and grief and loss, as an example. You may have to go through different levels, like desire and craving, like actually wanting something again. You'll have this, if you're coming up from fear and loss, you're going to go into like desire and craving. You got to go into anger would be next, and resentfulness and bitterness, and then you'd hop up into righteous pride. You don't have to go up the ladder that way. I have found I can make leaps into courage or neutrality or willingness, something like that. You can make the leap, but if you've got something running that needs to be addressed, you're not going to be able to make the leap. You're going to go into the next level, whatever that may be. So I want to focus on the map of consciousness, the level of courage, and help you understand what Dr. Hawkins has calibrated and what it means to be at the level of courage. So on his map, he's got 6 different columns on the map, and I'll just show you kind of quickly what that map looks like. There's 6 columns, and each column describes what the perception is going on in consciousness when you're operating from each level. So we're just talking about courage today, which again is 10 to the 200th power. It's 200 on the map of consciousness. Now, every level has what's called its own process. You're processing things in a particular way. And at courage, the process is empowerment. And I found this really interesting, that most coaches or inspirational speakers or teachers are trying to get you to step into your own power. And they're trying to empower and inspire you to step into courage on some subject, which is interesting that this is the land of coaching, really. When the process is empowerment, you're trying to empower your students or your clients with some issue that they're dealing with. So the process at courage is empowerment. The emotion is affirmation, which is kind of weird, you know. Is affirmation an emotion? I don't know, but it's also kind of like a process. And I discussed this last week in the How to Let Go podcast and videocast, that affirmations are hard to say when you're still dealing and struggling with lower level emotions, because you don't believe it, and the energy and the perception is not there. So I have found that when you start to let go of the lower levels emotions, it becomes easier to state an affirmation, much easier. And today I'm going to teach you, I'm going to give you an affirmation at the end that's really helpful, as opposed to stating something that's not true, as an example. There's a workaround in consciousness that helps you pass through, you know, your negative emotions and let go of them and come to a point where you can start to affirm something that is positive aspect oriented. But you're not going to get there until you kind of untangle the resistance that's behind it. So at the level of courage, the emotion is affirmation, the process is empowerment. Okay, so the other 2 of the columns is the level, discussing the level is courage, and the rhythmic measurement for courage is 200. But then the next column is called self-view. And when you're operating from a level of consciousness of courage, or whatever level you're at, you have a perception of yourself, which is interesting to look at this, to see how are you perceiving yourself. And you may perceive yourself in different ways depending on how you're feeling. But overall, the self-view of someone who's operating from the level of courage is feasible. So you are you're perceiving your life that everything is feasible. You have a can-do attitude. You have no worries, really. You can, like, I can do this. It's kind of like, you know, Nike, just do it. And you feel like you can just do it. So you're your perception of yourself is that you can do it, which is great to have. It's positive aspect oriented, and you have the power and the energy to do whatever you want to do when you put your mind to it. And lastly, the God view. This is a really good one, and I'm going to have a whole podcast on God views because I think it's important to understand, like, I had a God view that was punishing. And I looked at the map, I'm like, oh my God, where the heck did that come from in my life? And I feel like to perceive God as punishing comes from a mass consciousness belief that isn't true. And we'll talk about that later. I want to save that for another episode. And maybe I'll do that next week. We'll talk about God view. I think that would be good for all of us to talk about. How do you perceive God, if you even perceive that one exists at all, which there are levels of consciousness where you don't accept that. So God view at the level of consciousness of courage is permitting. So God is not punishing at the level of courage. God is permitting. So whatever you want to do, you have God's permission to do it, which is a lower level of consciousness in reality, because God is infinitely loving and compassionate, like huge. You can't even measure it. You can't even hold it, and the human mind can't even hold it. But we'll go there when we go to God view. So to repeat, at the level of courage, and this is where I encourage this is where you need to be to start having any sort of power in your life, or to get over any lower level victimhood energy you got running, is, so the process in courage is empowerment, the emotion is affirmation, your self view is feasible, and your God view is permitting. So that's it for today's weekly dose of higher consciousness. And I want to give you an affirmation today in regards to courage. And the affirmation is simply, I am willing to step into courage on this issue. That's it. If you have an issue in your life you've been struggling with, I am willing to step into courage on this issue. I'm willing to look at it. And the energy, you're going to feel the energy shift, and you're going to feel the power of courage, kind of the energy field of courage is going to align with you, and you should feel the shift if you're not doubting yourself. So this type of affirmation where you're using willingness, and willingness, I love to use the map of consciousness and use kind of the power in other levels. So willingness on the map of consciousness is 310. So I'm like, I'm going right to willingness. Use that word because it's powerful. And affirm, I'm willing to step into courage. Or wherever you're willing to step into. If you're willing to step into being neutral, that's more powerful at 250. You're willing to step into willingness, that's 310. Those are powerful states. And the energy and the attractor fields of those impersonal fields are there to support you when you have it in your heart. So always using the word willingness is an excellent intention because of the level of consciousness of that. And another great process to use is understanding. That's at the level of 400. So another affirmation you could use is, I'm willing to step into courage, and I understand it's a powerful and positive step to take. So use willingness and understanding, and now you're combining two high levels of consciousness to help you, and the impersonal attractor fields of those levels will come to meet you to do it, and it's going to be easier. You can stop struggling. All right. So I want to go back to our test today to discuss which is of highest consciousness. The first one was random acts of kindness, to be one who performs random acts of kindness. The second one was kneeling to pray. And the third one is visualization healing. So if you have some some ailment that you want to heal, the process of visualizing yourself healing is a powerful one. So guess which one is of the highest power. I'll give you half a second to guess. Let's start with the lowest level, which is not low level, it's high level of consciousness. Random acts of kindness. To perform random acts of kindness, let me double check my calibration number so I say it right. Random acts of kindness calibrates at 350 on the map of consciousness. That's huge. And that's the level of consciousness where you as an individual are willing to accept responsibility for your life, and you're willing to accept you're the creator of your own experience. This is what Dr. Hawkins calls a spiritual gateway. When you're willing to step into that truth, now you're aligning with very high level attractor fields, and to perform random acts of kindness is huge, which is no wonder. And it calibrates at 350 on the map of consciousness. Next up is healing visualization, calibrates at 485 on the map of consciousness, which is a quantum leap up from random acts of kindness. Just so you know, there is a lot of power in visualizing yourself healing. Superpower at 485. But even of greater power is to kneel to pray, and it's considered a devotional act. And I definitely want to do a whole episode on devotional acts because it's really super powerful to make your life kind of like a living prayer and have everything you do be devotional in nature without being sappy, super sappy or drippy or needy about it. It's a different energy. So we can talk about that when I do a podcast and video cast on devotion. So anything that is devotional calibrates at 540 on the map of consciousness, which is the level of joy and unconditional love. It's getting close to unconditional love. And only 0.4% of the planet calibrated this level of consciousness. It's a very high level of consciousness. It is not of this world. I can attest. I have been at that level and higher for extended periods of time. And it's a phenomenal state of grace, really, to be that way. So I, for myself, have decided, you know what, I'm going to use the understanding of the power of devotion and practice being devotional in my everyday life at 540 on the map of consciousness. You can manifest everything you want as long as you don't have some lower stuff running, like you're unworthy. That unworthiness thing is insidious to all of us. So kneeling to pray, any type of devotional act calibrates at 540 on the map of consciousness. That's it today, gang. I hope you found this helpful. You got to step into courage to get in some power in your life. You got to go there first. If you like what's going on or you have questions or comments, please leave a comment or ask a question below, wherever you're watching this, podcast, YouTube, website, wherever. And if you like stepping into greater happiness and loving yourself and learning how to let go, you're going to want to subscribe to my podcast at trumpeteroftruthradio.com or my YouTube channel at trumpeteroftruhtv.com. And you can email me questions to liz@trumpeteroftruth.com. That's my website, trumpeteroftruth.com. I so enjoy sharing this and sharing my insights as to how I overcame some really challenging levels of consciousness and have come to be your happy host and trumpeter of truth. Again, my name is Liz Gracia. I'll see you next week, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to talk about God view next week. That's a good one, to see where your level of consciousness is at on your view of God. That's a good one. See you then.